The wind tore across the Wyoming plains, carrying the scent of snow and gunpowder. Inside a lone cabin crouched against the horizon, a single flame flickered weak, but alive. Clara Wynne sat on the edge of a narrow bed, still wearing the borrowed dress from a rushed courthouse wedding. Her hands were clasped tight, knuckles pale, breath trembling. She wasn't born to be anyone's wife, especially not his. Behind her, Silas Ward, the rancher, hung his hat on a nail. He was younger than rumor claimed, tall and deliberate in every movement, a man who spoke less than his horses. The silence between them thickened like fog. Clara's whisper cracked through it. "I don't know how to be a wife." Silas stopped mid-step. His voice, when it came, was low, steady, like a river under ice. "You don't need to know. Just stay alive tonight." She turned, startled not by the words, but the fear beneath them. Outside, wolves howled in the dark, but it wasn't wolves that had chased her across 3 counties. It was men with badges, gold, and blood on their hands. Silas crossed the room and blew out the lamp. "Whatever you ran from, Clara," he said, "it's about to find us." Morning crept over the valley, slow and golden, spilling through cracks in the cabin walls. The fire had burned down to ash, leaving only the faint smell of cedar and smoke. Clara sat at the table, tracing the rim of a tin cup, listening to the low rumble of Silas outside, boots crunching frost, saddle leather creaking, horses snorting steam into the cold. The cabin stood miles from the nearest town, perched above a bend in the Sweetwater River. It wasn't much rough logs, a single window, a roof patched with hides, but it was solid. And for the first time in months, Clara could breathe without tasting fear. Silas Ward's land stretched wider than her eyes could see, rolling hills scarred by fire, broken fences, a horizon that swallowed men whole. He'd built it with his own hands after the war, fighting cattle thieves, blizzards, and his own ghosts. Folks said he used to be a lawman, others said an outlaw. Clara didn't care which was true. All she knew was that the world obeyed the quiet men, the ones who never had to raise their voice to be heard. Inside, she glanced at the rifle propped by the door, its barrel worn smooth from use. On the wall hung a single photograph, a woman with soft eyes and a smile that hadn't seen war. Silas's late wife. Clara looked away quickly, guilt pressing against her ribs. She wasn't here for love or belonging. She was here because her name was on a wanted poster, and because the man who'd offered her shelter was the last person anyone would dare to cross in these parts. The knock came just after sundown. 3 hard raps against the cabin door, measured, deliberate. Silas looked up from cleaning his revolver, the motion of his hands pausing mid-oil. Clara froze by the stove, the ladle clinking against the pot. No one knocked out here. Not unless they came with purpose. Silas rose, every movement slow as if weighing each breath. He nodded once toward the back room. "Stay quiet. Don't open that door for anyone but me." His voice was calm, but Clara caught something new in it, tension coiled like a drawn bow. She backed away, heart hammering. Through a crack in the wall, she saw him open the door just enough to meet the man outside. A deputy's badge glinted in the firelight. "Evenin', Ward," the stranger drawled. "Heard you took a wife. Funny thing, though, no one seems to recall where she's from." Silas's jaw tightened. "She's from nowhere that concerns the law." The deputy grinned. "Everything concerns the law these days, especially when it's got a price on its head." Before Silas could answer, Clara's breath hitched audibly. The deputy's gaze flicked past him toward the sound. "Well now," he murmured, stepping forward. Silas moved faster. One shove slammed the door shut, and the click of a revolver filled the air. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind clawing at the eaves. Then Silas spoke, quiet and final. "You've made your mistake, Marshal. This land answers to me." From that moment on, Clara Wynne's life was no longer about hiding. It was about surviving whatever came through that door next. Snow began to fall that night, thin, drifting flakes that caught in the glow of the firelight like ashes from some faraway blaze. Inside the cabin, the air was taut with silence. Silas had barred the door, checked the windows twice, and moved with a purpose Clara didn't yet understand. He loaded a saddlebag, laid out 2 rifles, and lit a single lantern on the table. When he finally looked up at her, there was no comfort in his eyes, only resolve. "They'll be back," he said. "And not just that, deputy. Men like him don't ride alone. Clara stood near the hearth, her fingers trembling around the edge of her shawl. Why? Why are they after me? I didn't steal anything. Silas didn't answer right away. He tossed a log into the fire and watched the sparks climb. Maybe not. But you saw something you shouldn't have. Her mouth went dry. You think I'd tell them? I think they believe you might. And? He looked toward the window, where the snow had thickened to white sheets. His voice dropped to a whisper. Tell me, Clara, whose blood was on your dress the night I found you in Dry Hollow. Her body stiffened. The question hung heavy between them. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she said, Not mine. That was enough. Silas's expression didn't change, but the weight of his silence told her he already knew the rest. He had seen the terror in her eyes that night by the river, the way she flinched at every passing rider. He holstered his revolver and said simply, Then we ride before dawn. They left the ranch under a bruised sky, the world quiet but for the crunch of hooves over frozen ground. Clara rode behind Silas, clutching the reins with numb fingers. Every few minutes, he'd glance back, scanning the horizon for movement. By sunrise, smoke curled from behind them, thin, rising columns from the direction of the ranch. She didn't have to ask. The men had come early. They burned it? She whispered. Silas didn't look back. They were sending a message. Her chest tightened. That you can't hide me. That I won't, he corrected. They rode until the sun climbed high, stopping only when the horses shuddered from exhaustion. They made camp near a frozen creek, the silence between them now less of fear, more of unspoken trust. Clara tried to help gather firewood, but her hands shook too badly to carry much. You ever used a gun? Silas asked as he built the fire. She shook her head. No, my father wouldn't allow it. He handed her his revolver anyway. Then start now. The weapon felt heavy in her grip, wrong and right all at once. Silas knelt beside her, guiding her hands. Keep your wrist firm. Don't close your eyes. The world's already full of men who'll shoot before thinking you don't get to be one of them. She nodded, jaw set. And when she finally pulled the trigger, the crack echoed through the trees like thunder. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but she didn't flinch. Silas's mouth twitched, half approval, half warning. Good. Now remember how it feels. By the second night, the storm had thickened into a white curtain. They found shelter in an abandoned way station. The roof half collapsed, walls wind-worn. Silas tethered the horses and stoked a fire from scraps of broken furniture. Clara sat close, her hair damp, steam rising from her coat. Who are they? She asked finally. Those men. He stirred the coals. They used to wear stars, now they wear suits. Old lawmen turned businessmen. They buy land, water rights, people. The deputy Rafe Harlan isn't after you for bounty. He's after you because you were there. Where? The night the judge was killed. Her breath caught. You know about that? Everyone in 3 counties knows about it. But only one woman walked away. Clara looked into the fire, eyes glistening. He was my employer, she said softly. He gave me food when no one else would. And when he found out what his own deputies were doing, he tried to stop them. She swallowed hard. They made me watch. Silas said nothing. He reached for the fire poker, the metal glowing red at its tip. Then you were right to run. The sound came just before dawn, a distant crack of wood, then another. Silas was on his feet before the horses even whinnied. He pressed a finger to his lips, motioning Clara toward the rear wall. Through a gap in the boards, torchlight flickered. 3, maybe 4 riders. Stay down, he whispered. The next moments unfolded like a bad dream. Hooves thundered. Voices shouted. One man called out, Ward, you can't hide her forever. Another laughed, a sound Clara recognized from her nightmares. Rafe Harlan. Silas cocked his rifle. If you want her, come earn it. The first shot shattered the window. Glass and smoke filled the air. Clara ducked, heart racing. Silas fired back, one bullet finding its mark. A scream echoed, followed by the sound of a body hitting snow. But there were too many. The second man flanked the barn. The third came through the roof. Silas turned, firing again, the gun kicking in his hand. The man dropped, but not before sending a shot into Silas's shoulder. Silas! Clara crawled toward him, dragging the revolver she'd practiced with. Blood darkened his sleeve, but his aim stayed steady. He met her eyes. "You remember what I told you?" She nodded. "Then don't close them." When the next attacker burst through the door, Clara pulled the trigger. Once, twice. The man fell forward, his torch tumbling from his grasp and rolling across the floorboards. Flames licked up the wall, smoke curling thick and fast. "Out!" Silas barked, pulling her through the side door as the station erupted behind them. They staggered into the snow, coughing, eyes stinging. The fire rose behind them, painting the night orange. Silas stumbled once, blood marking his trail. She caught his arm, steadying him. "We can't stop here. We won't." He pointed north toward the mountains. "There's an old mining route, no law up there. We ride until dawn." The climb was brutal. The path wound through ice and rock, each gust of wind cutting like a blade. By morning, the horses were shaking, their breath turning to clouds. Silas's wound bled through his coat, but he pressed on, grim and silent. Clara rode close behind, her face pale, her eyes sharp now, no longer the frightened woman he'd found in Dry Hollow. When they finally stopped in a ravine sheltered by pines, Silas slid from his horse, half collapsing. She caught him, lowering him to the snow. "You're losing too much blood," he grunted. "I've had worse, not from men like them." He managed a faint smile. "Fair point." She tore a strip from her skirt, pressing it to his wound. Her hands were slick with red before she realized she was crying. Silas's fingers brushed her wrist. "You did good back there. I killed a man. You saved us both. Don't ever be sorry for that." That night, as Silas drifted in and out of fever, Clara kept the fire alive and the horses close. She found herself whispering half prayer, half confession. "My name isn't Clara Wynne," she said softly. "It's Mae Harper. My father was the judge they murdered." Silas stirred, eyes opening halfway. "I know," he murmured. "I saw your wanted notice. They called you a killer. I didn't kill him. I tried to stop them. But the one who did, he wore a badge." Silas nodded weakly. "That's why you can't hide. You're the only one left who can name them." Mae's throat tightened. "Then they'll never stop. Neither will I." She looked at him, the firelight carving shadows across his face, and for the first time, she understood that his silence wasn't emptiness, it was promise. By the third day, the wound began to heal, but danger still trailed behind them. Tracks appeared in the snow, 4 riders, closing fast. Mae packed their things in haste. "They found us again." Silas rose unsteadily, his hand gripping the rifle. "Then we finish this." They waited until dusk at the mouth of the canyon. The air was razor cold, wind slicing through pine. When the riders appeared, torches glowing like ghost fire, Mae's heartbeat steadied. "Silas knelt beside her. Aim low," he whispered. "Let them think you're scared." The first shot cracked from the canyon wall, Silas's bullet hitting true. The second rider fell before he could raise his gun. Mae fired next, the recoil jarring her arm, but she hit one square in the chest. Only one rider remained, Rafe Harlan. He dismounted slowly, grinning even as the snow turned crimson around him. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. "You can't kill what the law protects." Silas stood tall, rifle leveled. "Then maybe it's time the law learned fear again." The 2 men stared each other down, the storm swirling between them. Harlan drew first, but Silas was faster. The report echoed through the canyon, final and absolute. Harlan fell, his badge glinting in the snow. Mae lowered her gun, breath shaking. Silas turned to her, blood on his lip, smoke rising from his barrel. "It's over," he said. She shook her head. "Not yet. I'm done running." And he studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we go to Fort Bridger. You tell your story." They rode through the night, through silence and snow, 2 ghosts bound by survival. Mae no longer hid her name. Silas no longer hid his heart. And when dawn broke over the mountains, it didn't feel like escape, it felt like reckoning. The town of Fort Bridger was half buried under snow when they arrived, a scatter of cabins, a trading post, and a military fort surrounded by pine. Soldiers watched from behind frost-covered windows as the 2 riders approached, a wounded rancher and a woman with eyes too old for her years. Mae Harper hadn't slept in 2 days. Her clothes were stiff with cold, her hair tangled with ash and dust, but when the officer at the gate demanded her name, she lifted her chin and spoke without trembling. "Mae Harper, I've come to testify." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Inside, they were taken to the command building's stone walls, maps nailed to the plaster, a brass stove glowing red. The captain, a man with silver in his beard and suspicion in his eyes, leaned back in his chair. "You're saying you witnessed the murder of Judge Samuel Harper 3 months ago?" Mae nodded. "He was my father." The captain glanced at Silas. "And you are?" Silas's voice was low. "Her husband." The captain's brow arched. "Convenient." Silas's hand tightened on his hat, but he said nothing more. Mae stepped forward. "The men who did it are still out there. They wore badges, but they worked for the rail companies trafficking women and children through Kansas and Colorado. One of them was Deputy Rafe Harlan." The captain frowned. "Harlan was reported dead last week." Mae's pulse jumped. "He's not dead. We buried him ourselves." Silas shifted, his gaze fixed on the captain's eyes. "Then you'll know this isn't over." Harlan wasn't alone. They were given quarters in a small barracks, 2 iron beds, 1 lantern, and the thin comfort of walls. Silas slept little. His wound had begun to fester, and though he hid the pain behind quiet grunts, Mae saw it in every breath. "You should let the doctor look," she whispered that night. He shook his head. "The army doesn't fix men like me." She frowned. "What does that mean?" Silas looked at her then, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something break in his composure. "I used to wear a badge too," he said quietly. "Before the war. Before all this." Mae froze. "You were a marshal?" He nodded slowly. "Wyoming Circuit. Rode with the same men who killed your father. When the railroad came through, they called it cleaning the territories. But all we did was make room for greed." The confession hit her like a gunshot. I left before the worst of it," he said. "But not soon enough." Silas's voice cracked with something that wasn't fear. "Regret. When I found you by the river, I thought maybe I could make it right by keeping you alive. But truth is, I'm the reason men like Harlan ever had power to begin with." Mae stared at him, her throat tight. The fire flickered between them, lighting his face in orange and shadow. "You could have lied," she whispered. "I've done enough of that." For a long while, the only sound was the wind. Then she reached across the space between their beds and took his hand. "Then make it right with me now." Then, he didn't answer, but his grip tightened. The next morning, the captain summoned them to testify before a military magistrate sent from Denver. The hearing was set inside the fort's main hall, cold stone walls. Soldiers standing at attention, a small table where Mae would speak. But when they arrived, Mae stopped dead. Sitting beside the magistrate, his coat immaculate and his smile like winter glass, was Colonel Barrett, the man who had signed every authorization for the railway security operations her father tried to expose. His stomach dropped. Silas saw it too. His jaw tightened. "You know him?" Mae's voice shook. "He's the one who ordered it." The colonel's gaze found hers across the hall, and his thin smile widened. "Miss Harper. What an unexpected resurrection." The captain frowned. "Colonel Barrett, you know this witness?" "Oh, I know her father's work," Barrett said smoothly. "The man was passionate. Unfortunately, he died resisting arrest. His daughter's grief has made her imaginative." "Ugh." Mae's fists clenched. "You're lying." Barrett ignored her, turning his smile toward the magistrate. "I'd advise we end this farce. The witness is wanted in Kansas for obstruction of justice and accessory to murder." The captain's expression shifted. "Is that true?" Mae opened her mouth, but Silas stepped forward. "No. The charges were fabricated." Barrett's eyes flicked to him, recognition dawning. Well, Deputy Ward, or should I say, Deserter Ward, I didn't think you'd crawl out of the dirt to defend your mistakes." The room went still. Mae looked from one man to the other. "You knew him?" Barrett leaned back, smug. "He was one of mine, one of the best. Until he decided he had a conscience." Silas's voice turned to gravel. "I stopped taking orders the day I watched your men hang a preacher for protecting his own daughter." Barrett's smile faded. Careful what you confess, boy. The Army's memory is long. The magistrate rapped his gavel. Enough. This hearing will proceed. Mrs. Ward, you may speak. Mae rose, her legs trembling but her gaze clear. My name is Mae Harper. 3 months ago, I saw Colonel Barrett's men burn a church and kill my father. They said he stood in the way of progress. I say he stood for decency. That's the difference. Barrett laughed quietly. A touching speech, but you have no proof. Then, Mae reached into her coat and set a small leather book on the table, her father's ledger. Edges burned but legible. I do now. The room shifted. The magistrate leaned forward, reading the names scrawled inside. Barrett's smile faltered. Silas stepped closer to Mae's side, his voice steady. You were right to bring it. Barrett's hand twitched toward his coat. Gun, someone shouted. Everything exploded at once. Chairs scraping, soldiers yelling, the flash of steel. Barrett fired first, the bullet tearing through the air. Silas shoved Mae aside, the shot grazing his side. He dropped to one knee, firing back, the report echoing off stone. Barrett fell backward, blood blooming across his chest. Silas groaned, clutching his wound. You all right? Mae nodded, shaking. You saved my life again. He smiled faintly. Old habits. Later, as the fort descended into chaos, the captain approached them, the ledger in his hands. This changes everything. Barrett's operation goes all the way up. You'll need to disappear before the rest come looking. Mae looked at Silas, his face pale from blood loss. No, she said quietly. We're not running anymore. The captain frowned. If you stay, they'll hang you both before dawn. Silas's eyes met hers. He's right, but Mae shook her head. Then let them. I'm tired of surviving in shadows. Her words silenced the room. Then Silas exhaled slowly. All right, he said. Then we fight in daylight. They didn't sleep that night. Soldiers loyal to Barrett's network began to move through the fort like wolves in the dark. Mae stayed close to Silas, helping reload ammunition, wrapping his wound tighter. Each breath between them was a confession unspoken of guilt, of love, of survival. When dawn came, it came with gunfire. The barracks door shattered under rifle rounds. Silas pushed Mae behind the bed, returning fire through the smoke. She could see it in his movements. He was weakening, bleeding too much. Go, he shouted. No. He turned, eyes fierce. I said go, Mae, but she didn't. She crawled to the fallen captain's desk, grabbed the ledger, and ducked through a side window as the room erupted in fire. Outside, snow burned under flame and lead. Soldiers screamed. Horses broke free. Mae ran toward the stables, clutching the ledger to her chest. Behind her, the barracks roof collapsed in a roar. Silas, she screamed. Then through the smoke a figure emerged, staggering but alive, rifle in hand. He reached her just as riders approached from the ridge, reinforcements flying the Union flag. The mutineers froze, caught between the law they betrayed and the justice they feared. Silas leaned on Mae, both of them half dead, half free. You still think I don't know how to be a wife? She whispered through tears. He managed a bloody smile. You just proved otherwise. By midday, the mutiny was over. Barrett's men were arrested or fled. The magistrate ordered a full inquiry, and for the first time, Mae Harper's name was cleared. But when the doctor came to stitch Silas's wound, he shook his head. He's lost too much blood. Mae held his hand, refusing to let go. Don't you dare, she whispered. Not after everything. Silas's gaze softened. You made me remember what right feels like. Then live for it. He smiled faintly. If I can't, you will. And then, for a moment, silence broken only by the snow falling soft against the windows. But Silas Ward didn't die. Not that day. 3 days later, he woke to find Mae sleeping at his bedside, her fingers still locked in his. Outside, the fort was quiet. The ledger had been sent to Denver, the guilty already named. For the first time, there was peace. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Mae, he whispered. She stirred, blinking awake. You came back. Couldn't let you have all the glory. She laughed, then soft, tired, but real. That night, as the fire burned low, She sat beside him watching the snow melt on the window pane. What will we do now? Silas's eyes drifted to the horizon. There's land north of here. Untamed. Quiet. We'll build something that doesn't need law or forgiveness. Mae nodded. A home? He squeezed her hand. A beginning. Spring came to the high plains slow, cautious as if the land itself wasn't sure it could trust peace after so much blood. The snow melted into dark streams that whispered through the hills, carrying with them the ashes of a winter that had taken too much. Mae Harper stood beside Silas Ward on a rise overlooking the valley. Below them stretched a sweep of untouched earthgrass pushing through thawing soil, cottonwoods budding gold along a creek. Silas leaned on a cane now, the same one the fort's blacksmith had carved for him from the branch of a fallen pine. "So this is it?" Mae asked softly. He nodded. As far from law or rail as a soul can get. They had left Fort Bridger a week after his recovery, taking only 2 horses, a wagon of tools, and what little coin the captain could spare as a thank you. The rest, the ledger, the trial, the talk of reform belonged to another world. This one was theirs to start again. Mae took a deep breath of cold mountain air. Feels too quiet. Silas smiled faintly. That's what freedom sounds like. They began building the cabin that afternoon. She helped him drive the first stake, her palms blistering, her laughter mingling with the steady ring of his hammer. There were no hired men, no plans drawn in ink, just 2 scarred souls learning the weight of peace one board at a time. At night, they sat by the fire outside, wrapped in blankets and silence. The sky stretched endless above them, stars sharp and bright enough to cut through memory. Mae watched the flames dance on his face, the lines carved deep by wind and war. "You ever miss what came before?" she asked. He poked the fire with a stick. "No, but I think about what I owe it." She tilted her head. "And what's that?" He looked at her then, eyes steady. "The lesson that everything worth keeping has to be earned twice, once in blood and once in forgiveness." Ugh. For a while, neither spoke. The crackle of wood, the far cry of coyotes, the rhythm of their breathing became the only truth that mattered. By early summer, the cabin stood complete, rough-hewn but strong. A porch faced west, toward sunsets that turned the sky to molten gold. Mae planted wildflowers by the steps, bright streaks of yellow and violet among the dust. Each day began the same way. Silas at the corral mending tack, Mae at the creek, washing clothes or reading from the weathered book she'd carried since childhood, the one her father had given her, its pages smudged with dirt and prayer. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, she thought she heard her father's voice, calm and patient. "Be brave, my girl. Justice takes its time, but it always finds its way." And she would smile, knowing he had been right. One evening, as the sun dropped low, Silas came in from the barn with something small wrapped in cloth. He set it on the table without a word. Mae unfolded it, a simple gold ring, old and a little bent, the initials worn but visible. "I found it in town before we left," he said quietly. "Used to belong to my wife. I thought maybe it's time someone wore it again." Her throat tightened. "Silas." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "You don't have to say yes. Hell, we already survived worse than marriage." She laughed through her tears. "That we did." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the gold catching the last light of the setting Sunday. "Then it's settled," he said. "No preacher, no paper. Just us." Mae looked down at her hand, then up at him. "I think that's all the heaven I need." That night, the wind softened, the air warm with the scent of sage. They lay in the tall grass behind the cabin, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars bloom above the dark ridges. Silas exhaled slow. "Do you ever think we were meant to find each other?" Mae smiled faintly. "No. I think we chose to." He turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's better." They stayed like that, not speaking, not needing to until the night folded around them like a promise. For the first time in years, Mae Harper didn't feel hunted, or hollow, or waiting for the next gunshot. She felt the earth beneath her, solid and alive. She felt his heartbeat under her palm. The world had taken everything from them, but it hadn't taken this, the simple, stubborn miracle of 2 people who refused to stay broken. When the first storm of autumn swept across the valley months later, it found the cabin still standing, the light inside warm and unshaken. And if any traveler passed that way, they might have seen smoke rising from the chimney and heard laughter through the wind, the kind that sounded like home. Years passed quietly in the high country. Seasons came and went with the rhythm of a pendulum, harsh, beautiful, merciless. The world beyond their valley changed. Railroads cut deeper into the plains. Towns rose and fell. Lawmen traded stars for suits. But here, in the hollow between the mountains, Silas Ward and Mae Harper remained untouched by it all. They aged into the land like two old trees, roots tangled, unshakable. Sometimes travelers stopped by their cabin, drawn by the smell of bread or the sight of smoke in the distance. They spoke of distant wars, of fortunes made and lost. Most never recognized Silas, the ex-lawman turned ghost, or Mae, the preacher's daughter who once brought down a colonel. To them, the couple was just another part of the wilderness. Quiet, enduring, necessary. Mae would smile as she handed out coffee and stew, her hair now streaked with silver. Silas would nod from the porch, his rifle resting across his knees more out of habit than need. But every so often, when night fell and the fire crackled low, Mae would find him staring into the flames. "Still see their faces?" she'd ask. He'd nod. "Some nights. And what do you do then?" He'd turn to her, the lines around his eyes deepened by time but softened by peace. "I remember what came after," she'd smile gently. "And what came after?" "You," he'd say simply. The last winter was long, the kind that made the sky white for weeks. When it broke, spring spilled across the hills like forgiveness. Silas went first quiet. In his sleep, his hand still resting in hers. Mae buried him under the cottonwood by the creek, the same place he'd said the land first felt alive. For days, the wind sang through the branches like an old hymn. She sat by the grave each morning, talking to him as if he were mending fences just out of sight. When summer came, the valley bloomed again. Mae tended the garden, kept the fire going, and wrote letters she never sent. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the world turned gold, she took off her ring and placed it on the wooden cross. "I know what it means now," she whispered, "to be a wife." Then she smiled, not the smile of sorrow, but of someone who had finally come home. Long after both were gone, travelers still spoke of the cabin near the Sweetwater Creek, a place where the wind was gentle, where wildflowers grew even in winter, and where two souls, scarred but unbroken, found something stronger than law or death. They called it the Harper Ward homestead, but the old ranchers had a simpler name for it. They called it Mercy Valley.